Hi, I'm Gary Worden, and I'm going to talk about setting marks. I'll start by talking a little bit about the marks we have at MYC to support all the racing we do. It's the anchor line that must be properly managed in the efficient setting of a mark, so that's what this session will focus on after that. I'll define the term scope as it pertains to anchor line as well as how scope should be minimized on our marks. After going over how to set a mark, we'll cover anchor line tangling, and finally we'll talk about how racing marks should and should not be moved. We have a variety of mark types here at MYC: pins with flags, large cylinders, tomatoes, and balls of various sizes. Pins and some of the other marks can be grabbed directly when you want to retrieve them from the water, but a boat hook is required for some marks without handles. Most of our marks have a counterweight near the top of the anchor line. All the marks' anchors are draggable along the lake bottom. They're not designed to dig into the bottom, but to be easily moved. Since Lake Massapoag has a maximum depth of about 45 feet, most marks except cylinders have a 50-foot anchor line on them. The cylinder racing marks are unique. They are stored separately from their anchors. These anchors have either a 35-foot or a 70-foot line attached, and a pickup buoy is attached at the top so we don't lose them. The anchor of the appropriate length is clipped to the cylinder mark assembly. Before we drop any anchors into the water, it's important to understand what is meant by anchor line scope. Scope is defined as the ratio of the length of an anchor line or the rode to the depth of the water. The water's current and wind move a mark as far from its anchor as the length of the line will allow. We don't have to contend with a current at Lake Massapoag, just wind. When a mark's anchor line allows it to move significantly from where the anchor was dropped, you have a high amount of scope. When the mark is almost directly over its anchor, you have very little scope. In other words, the greater the scope, the less vertical the line is, and the longer the horizontal distance between the anchor and the mark. More scope is desirable for anchoring a heavy boat, but it just causes problems when anchoring marks that need to be precisely located. When setting a mark, make sure that the anchor hits the bottom and then minimize the scope on the anchor line by shortening it to a few feet longer than the depth of the water. All of our marks will stay in place with about 1-to-1 scope as long as the anchor is on the bottom, unless it is so windy that we won't be sailing anyway. With too much scope, an anchor line can be snagged by a sailboat centerboard and dragged away from its position. An anchor line's counterweight will keep the line more vertical beneath the mark and thus reduce the risk that a boat will catch the mark's anchor line. Shortening the anchor line also keeps it more vertical and has the extra benefit of keeping the mark from drifting away from its intended position. You can see that on this mark we have a chain counterweight to pull the anchor line straight down. Most of our marks have some sort of weight like this, which alleviates the problems of lines getting caught on sailors' centerboards. Say I want to set a mark roughly where that yellow mark already is. I will drop my anchor at about a boat length or so to windward of the desired location. So, right about here. I drop the anchor and let it go until I feel the tension on the line go slack, so I know it's on the bottom. Then I tie a little loop in the line. Most marks have a hook near the top of their anchor line. I'll insert the little loop in the hook, shortening the anchor line so it's maybe 5 feet greater than the water's depth. Then I throw the mark and its line into the water. With this method, I'm able to get the mark positioned quite accurately in the windward-leeward direction, which is what you really need when you're setting a starting pin or an offset mark. If you're off a little bit side to side in the direction perpendicular to the wind, it's not much of a problem. I too often find that a mark's anchor line has tangles that must be removed before it is deployed. Never deploy a tangled anchor line into the water. Tangles can prevent the anchor from reaching the bottom, allowing the mark to float away. Always try to coil a mark's anchor line when picking it back up as well. Whenever you move a mark in any direction, you need to be careful to keep its anchor line away from the boat's propeller. To keep it away from the motor when towing, hold the line up high so you can see it while steering. Sometimes holding the mark's line at the bow and backing up is a good idea. Now let's talk about how straightforward and easy it is to move a mark to leeward. The person in the mark boat grabs the mark and tows it slowly leeward, feeling the anchor drag along the bottom. The mark is then released a few feet beyond the desired location. The mark will spring back a few feet toward its anchor due to the mark's counterweight and the weight of the anchor line, and it will be exactly in the right place. Moving a mark to windward is another thing altogether. If you just grab the mark and tow it windward, you may not actually move the anchor at all or as far as you think. And when you release it near its desired location, the wind will move the mark back to leeward toward its original position. It's all guesswork. Even experienced people can't get it right consistently. The only reliable way to move a mark to an exact spot to windward is to move it far to windward and then move it back to leeward just beyond its desired location, as described earlier. I usually face the mark boat into the wind and tow to leeward in reverse in this case. The pin should spring back to the intended location and you're all set. So moving a mark to windward usually involves moving it to leeward as well. Note that when moving marks, if the depth of the lake at the desired mark location is significantly different from its original location, the race committee may have to adjust the anchor line length. Let's reiterate the major points. One should become familiar with the marks we use here at NYC. It's important that the race committee members understand the effects of anchor line scope. When setting a mark, you should feel the mark's anchor hit the bottom and then shorten the anchor line as needed to minimize the scope. I demonstrated one way of shortening a line, but there are other methods as well. Be careful not to tangle anchor lines and always untangle an anchor line before deploying it. Never just heave a mark and its anchor into the water. Finally, a mark should always be moved to leeward for accurate placement. When the desired location is to windward, first move the mark too far to windward and then move it to leeward for the final placement. Thanks for watching.